She thought she was saving a stranger's life, but when the headlights died beneath the Sicilian waves, she had no idea she was pulling her brother's killer back into the light. The night air over the Sicilian coast carried a sharp salt tang, the kind that clung to the back of your throat and whispered of loss. Nurse Isabella Moretti sat in her old Fiat parked along the cliffs outside Palermo, her fingers wrapped around a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. She wasn't supposed to be here, not this late, not this close to the sea. The sea was where she lost him. She stared down at the waves crashing below, thinking about Matteo, her younger brother. His laugh, his careless grin, his life cut short by a black car that vanished into the night. The police called it a hit and run, but the whispers had always said one thing: mafia business. And that was the night she stopped believing in miracles. Her phone buzzed, a call from the hospital. A car accident on the coastal road. Emergency intake. The kind of call that demanded instinct, not memory. Isabella started the engine, the hum breaking her reverie, and turned the car toward the flashing lights in the distance. As she drove, the sound of sirens mixed with the echo of the waves, both chasing something she could never quite catch. Welcome back, my amazing family and friends. If you're ready to settle in and enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I'll be releasing another story that's just as captivating, and believe me, you won't want to miss it. Now, let the story begin. Elsewhere, the Vitali estate glittered under the moonlight, its marble halls filled with noise that wasn't quite celebration. Lorenzo Vitali, head of the Vitali crime family, stood alone on the balcony, a cigarette burning between his fingers. The laughter from inside, his men, his so-called allies, felt distant. He had built his empire on loyalty and fear. Now, both were cracking. A betrayal had come from within. His cousin Rico, the only family he still trusted, had sold him out to rivals in Catania. A deal gone wrong. A shipment seized. A price on Lorenzo's head. He had spent his life making others kneel. Now, he was running from his own ghosts. The sound of an approaching storm rolled in from the sea. He flicked the cigarette away and whispered something to the wind, a name no one else knew. Lucia. His late wife. His last fragment of softness, buried 5 years ago under marble and grief. When his driver arrived, Lorenzo said nothing. Take the coastal road, was all. He wanted quiet. The sea at night was the only place that didn't demand blood or obedience. But the rain came fast, heavy, blinding. The tires skidded. The guardrail snapped. The car screamed as it plunged toward the dark water below. By the time Isabella's headlights caught the shimmer of twisted metal, her body had already gone cold with instinct. A black Maserati, half submerged, the driver's side sinking fast. The waves slapped against the frame, swallowing the headlights one by one. Without hesitation, she kicked off her shoes, stripped down to her undershirt, and dove. The water was a shock, freezing, thick with fuel and salt. Her lungs burned, her heart raced. She reached the car window, pried it open against the resistance, and saw him, unconscious, blood streaking down his temple. For one heartbeat, she saw only a man. For the next, she saw the monster from every whispered story. The tattoos. The expensive ring. The face she'd seen in newspapers. Lorenzo Vitali. The air rushed out of her chest. She could let him sink. No one would ever know. But her training screamed louder than her hate. Damn it, she muttered, and pulled. Her muscles burned as she dragged him through the current, his weight dead and heavy. The rain blurred the surface, turning the world into chaos. She broke through the waves, gasping, pulling him toward shore until the sand met her knees. He wasn't breathing. Her hands moved on their own. Compressions, breaths, rhythm. Come on. Come on, she shouted through gritted teeth. Her tears mixed with rain. When his chest jerked, coughing up seawater, she almost screamed in relief and horror. He lived. And in the flickering lights of the approaching ambulance, Isabella realized the man she had just saved was the one kind of man she'd sworn to never touch. As paramedics lifted Lorenzo onto the stretcher, his eyes fluttered open for a second, just enough to catch her face. You, his voice rasped, rough as gravel. You pulled me out? She nodded, trembling. His lips curved into something between gratitude and disbelief. "Then I owe you my life, Angel." The word angel lingered, heavy, tainted. She flinched, as if the label burned her. The ambulance doors slammed shut. As Isabella stood in the rain, watching the taillights disappear, she whispered to herself, "Not your angel, Vitali." The storm rolled overhead, swallowing her words, but fate had already heard them. The smell of antiseptic was sharp enough to erase the sea from her skin, but Isabella Moretti still felt the weight of salt in her hair, the cold sting of the waves in her bones. She'd been on shift since dawn, yet her heart hadn't slowed since last night's rescue. In room 307, behind drawn curtains, lay the man who refused to die. She tried to convince herself it didn't matter. He was a patient, nothing more. But every time she passed that door, something inside her clenched, as if her body knew what her mind was desperate to forget. When her supervisor called her in to check his vitals, Isabella hesitated. "He's awake." "Yes." "Disoriented." "Don't engage if he starts talking nonsense." She almost laughed. Nonsense was probably the least dangerous thing that could come out of Lorenzo Vitali's mouth. He was sitting up when she entered. Pale light filtered through half-closed blinds, laying golden stripes across the clean white sheets. Lorenzo Vitali looked smaller in a hospital gown, stripped of his tailored suits, his power, his armor. The bandage at his temple contrasted sharply with the dark tattoos curling along his collarbone. His gaze, however, was still that of a man used to being obeyed, sharp, assessing, unflinching. "You're the nurse," he said. His voice was low, hoarse, threaded with gravel and control. She didn't answer immediately. She adjusted his foreline, checked the monitors, avoiding his eyes. "I remember the water," he continued. "And your face." "You suffered mild hypoxia," she replied, her tone clipped. "You'll make a full recovery if you rest." He smiled faintly. "You saved me. It's my job." "That's not what I asked." Her fingers froze on the edge of the blanket. She forced herself to meet his gaze. Dark brown, almost black, full of something she couldn't name. "You were dying," she said. "I don't choose who lives and who doesn't. I just do what's necessary." "And yet," he murmured, leaning back, "you look terrified, not of the sea but of me." "Why?" Her heartbeat spiked. "Maybe because I know who you are." That silence between them was electric, dangerous, a collision of truth and denial. He chuckled softly, though the sound cracked at the edges. "Then you should have let me drown." For a long moment, neither spoke. The monitor beeped steadily, mocking the tension. Finally, she said, almost whispering, "Maybe I should have." He studied her like a puzzle. "You're not afraid to say that. Most people tremble around me." "I'm not most people," she said, and turned toward the door. But he said her name, quietly, deliberately. "Isabella." She stopped cold. "How do you?" "I asked," he interrupted. "When I woke up. The man who brought me in told me your name." He smiled again, tired, almost human. "It's a beautiful name. Means devoted to God, doesn't it?" She didn't respond. She couldn't. There was something obscene about hearing scripture fall from the lips of a man like him. As she reached for the doorknob, his voice came softer this time. "Why did you save me, Isabella Moretti?" Her throat tightened. "Because someone had to." "Lies," he whispered. "You saved me because you couldn't stop yourself. You still believe people can be saved." The words hit her like a blade. For a moment, her mask slipped, the ache behind her eyes, the flash of her brother's face. Then she turned and left, her footsteps echoing down the sterile corridor. Behind her, Lorenzo exhaled, a faint smile touching his lips. "She's different," he murmured. When the nurse left, the room felt colder. Lorenzo stared at the drip, the pale liquid snaking into his vein. He hated hospitals, the sterile smell, the sense of vulnerability. But this place was different. It smelled of salt and lavender, faint traces she'd left behind. He'd seen 100 faces in his life. Most were liars, killers, or frightened souls. Hers had been none of those. She'd looked at him like a man on the edge of a storm, part pity, part fury. It intrigued him more than he wanted to admit. He touched his chest, where the ache of drowning still lingered, and thought of her hands pressing against him, desperate, determined, alive. "She saved me," he whispered. "Maybe for a reason." For the first time in years, Lorenzo felt something he didn't recognize. Gratitude. Or maybe guilt. He couldn't tell the difference anymore. Later that night, Isabella stood on the hospital rooftop, the city spread beneath her like an ocean of flickering lights. Her friend and colleague, Sophia, leaned against the railing, smoking. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Sophia said. Isabella forced a thin smile. "Maybe I did." "That man, the one from last night. You found out who he is?" "Yes." Sophia's eyes widened. "Isabella, that's dangerous. The Vitales don't forget faces. You should have let the paramedics handle it." "I didn't know who he was," Isabella murmured. "Not until it was too late." Sophia blew out smoke. "Well, thank God he's alive, I guess." Isabella's jaw clenched. "Is it a sin to save someone who's done evil?" "Depends," Sophia said, flicking ash into the wind. "Do you believe he can change?" Isabella looked down at her trembling hands. "I don't know. But I'm afraid of what it means that I even care. Can you believe someone capable of darkness can truly change? Or do you think some people are beyond saving? Let me know in the comments." Inside room 307, Lorenzo lay awake, watching shadows crawl across the ceiling. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor felt like a heartbeat not entirely his own. He reached for the small gold cross hanging from his neck, a relic from his wife. He whispered into the dark, "She's the first person who looked at me like I wasn't a ghost." And somewhere down the corridor, Isabella paused mid-step, her chest tightening, as if his words, though unheard, had brushed against her heart. The spark had been lit. And neither of them knew how deep the fire would burn. 3 days had passed since the night Isabella Moretti pulled Lorenzo Vitali from the sea. She told herself it meant nothing, a simple rescue, one of many. Yet her body betrayed her. Every time she walked past room 307, her breath hitched. Every time she heard his voice, low, rough, always calm, something unsteady rose inside her. She'd begun switching duties with other nurses to avoid him. The hospital corridors were long, but not long enough to outrun the pull. Sophia caught her in the break room, pretending to read a chart she hadn't turned the page on in 10 minutes. Still avoiding the mafia boss? Isabella sighed. "He's not my responsibility anymore." Sophia grinned. "You keep saying that like you're trying to convince yourself." "I'm serious, Sophia. The less I see him, the better." Sophia shrugged, lighting a cigarette she wasn't supposed to have inside. "Sometimes fate doesn't care about what's better." Isabella glared. "Fate can mind its own business." But fate wasn't listening. By noon, she was called unexpectedly to room 307. The nurse assigned to him had fainted in the hall, stress, they said, and Isabella was the only available substitute. Her pulse quickened as she pushed the door open. Lorenzo was sitting by the window, sunlight spilling over his face, casting the faintest gold over the scar on his temple. He looked up, a half-smile curving his lips. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about me, Angelo mio." "Don't call me that," she said sharply. He chuckled. "Then what should I call you?" "Nothing. You shouldn't call me at all." "You saved my life," he said. "You don't get to disappear. That's not how debts work in my world." "Then maybe your world needs fixing." He studied her face for a long time, longer than she could bear. "You really believe that, don't you? That the world can be fixed?" She tightened his foreline, refusing to meet his gaze. "Someone has to." For the first time, Lorenzo's tone softened, the arrogance slipping for just a second. "And what about you, Isabella? Who fixes you?" The question caught her off guard. Her hands froze mid-motion. She met his eyes then, and wished she hadn't. There was no mockery there, only quiet understanding. "Nobody," she said, almost whispering. I don't need fixing. Lorenzo smiled faintly. Everyone needs fixing. She turned and left before he could see her eyes glisten. That evening, as Lorenzo dozed, a dark sedan pulled into the hospital's back lot. Two men stepped out, heavy coats, heavier intent. They asked no questions at the front desk. They didn't need to. Inside the ward, Isabella noticed them first. The way their eyes lingered on the chart at Lorenzo's door, the subtle brush of a gun under one man's jacket. Her stomach dropped. She rushed to find security, but they were already moving down the hall. One reached for the door handle. "Excuse me," she said sharply, stepping between them. "You can't go in there. He's under observation." The taller one sneered. "Family business, signorina. You wouldn't understand." Her pulse hammered. "If you step into that room, I call the police." The second man laughed softly. "Police won't help you, nurse. You should walk away." Her hand trembled, but she didn't move. Not tonight. Something in her tone, steady, defiant, made them hesitate. A moment later, hospital security appeared, and the men slipped away, muttering threats. When she finally entered Lorenzo's room, her chest still tight, he was awake, eyes wide, already knowing. "They came for me?" he asked quietly. She nodded. He sighed, looking away. "Rico sent them. My cousin. He doesn't want me alive." "Then you shouldn't stay here," she said. "You're not safe." He looked back at her, steady, calm, resigned. "Neither are you." That night, Isabella couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, pale, wounded, and utterly human. The thought disgusted her. How could she pity him? How could she feel anything for a man whose kind had stolen everything from her? But when she remembered the look in his eyes when he said "neither are you," something broke open inside her chest. The next morning, she told herself she wouldn't go back to his room. And yet by mid-shift, she was standing outside his door again, staring at the handle like it was a test she kept failing. When she entered, Lorenzo was already waiting. "You came." "I'm checking your vitals. That's all." He smiled faintly. "Keep telling yourself that." "Why do you talk to me like that?" she snapped. "Like you know me." He leaned back. "Because I see you. The way you hide behind rules and kindness. You think it protects you, but it's just another kind of cage." She wanted to deny it, to tell him he didn't know anything about her. But the words wouldn't come. "You think I haven't seen cages," he continued. "Mine are made of gold and blood, but they're still cages." "Then leave them," she whispered. "Too late," he said. "Men like me don't get to start over." "Then why are you still here?" she asked. "Why fight to live?" He looked at her, something raw in his eyes. "Because you pulled me out." The air between them went still. That was the moment she broke, not out loud, but inside. She stepped back, shaking her head. "You don't know me," she said. "Don't make this something it's not." "I'm not the one pretending," he said quietly. Her eyes burned. "You think saving your life means I want anything from you? I don't. You represent everything I hate." He flinched, not visibly, but enough that she felt it. "Then hate me," he said softly. "Just don't walk away yet." But she did. The sound of her footsteps echoed down the hall, sharp and final. Lorenzo sat back, staring at the doorway she'd left open behind her. His chest ached, not from his injuries, but from something far worse. For the first time in years, he wanted to chase someone not for power, not for possession, but for forgiveness. Would you have walked away if you were Isabella, or stayed to see if the man you hated could ever prove you wrong? Tell me what your heart says. As the hospital lights dimmed for the night, two souls lay awake under the same roof, one trying to forget, the other trying to be remembered. In the distance, thunder rumbled again over the Mediterranean. The storm wasn't over. It was only circling back. The next morning, the hospital trembled with quiet tension. Two uniformed officers stood at the nurses' station, taking statements. The incident from the night before, two men in black coats, had been officially recorded as a disturbance. Unofficially, everyone knew what it meant. Trouble had followed Lorenzo Vitali inside. Isabella Moretti hadn't slept. She'd spent the night replaying every moment, the fear in his eyes, the way he'd said neither are you. Now, seeing police inside the ward, she realized he'd been right. Sophia whispered at her shoulder, "They're transferring him to a private recovery suite. Guarded." "Where?" "East wing. Top floor." Isabella nodded absently, but a knot formed in her chest. Top floor. That was the old wing, quiet, half-renovated, understaffed. And that night, a storm rolled in from the sea again. By evening, the power flickered. Lightning flashed through the corridors, followed by the deep growl of thunder. The hospital generator kicked in, but the lights dimmed again. Emergency protocols activated. Non-critical patients were moved to lower floors. But the East Wing, being partly under construction, was last on the list. Isabella was midway through assisting with transfers when the head nurse called out, "Isabella. Vitali's room, the elevator's down. He can't be moved yet. Stay with him until maintenance clears it." She froze. "Me? Yes. You're his attending nurse. Go." The rain lashed against the tall windows as she pushed open the heavy door to the East Wing. The corridor beyond was dim, only the red glow of emergency lights painting the walls. When she reached his room, Lorenzo was already standing, trying to steady himself on the four-pole. "What are you doing?" she demanded. He smirked faintly. "Trying to prove I'm not dead yet. You shouldn't be standing. I've been worse." She sighed, stepping closer to check his balance. "The storms caused a power failure. You'll have to stay here until it passes." "Just you and me?" "Don't flatter yourself. It's not by choice." Lightning cracked outside, illuminating the room in white for a heartbeat, and for that instant, their eyes met. The electricity in the air wasn't just from the storm. For an hour, silence reigned, except for thunder, wind, and the rhythmic beep of the monitor. Isabella sat across from him, arms folded, trying not to notice the way he winced when he moved. Despite everything, the name, the blood, the danger, her hands itched to check his wound. Finally, she couldn't stand it. "You need to lie down." "I've been lying down for 3 days. You'll tear your stitches." He raised an eyebrow. "Worried about me now?" She glared. "Worried about paperwork. I'm the one who'll get blamed if you bleed out." He chuckled softly. "Paperwork. You hide behind rules because they make you feel safe. And you hide behind arrogance because it makes you feel human." That stopped him. For a long time, neither spoke. Rain hammered the window. The monitor beeped between them, a heartbeat neither wanted to admit was shared. When the power flickered again, the lights went out completely. Total darkness. Isabella's breath caught. She hated the dark, ever since the night her brother died. She reached instinctively for her phone, the flashlight trembling in her hand. "You're afraid," Lorenzo said quietly. "Of being stuck in the dark with a criminal? Who wouldn't be?" He shook his head, voice low. "That's not it. It's something older." Her throat tightened. "Stop analyzing me." But he didn't. "Someone died, didn't they? Someone you loved." Her flashlight beam wavered. "You think you know everything, don't you?" "No," he said softly. "I just recognize pain when I see it." The room went silent again. Outside, wind howled against the glass. Then, without a word, Lorenzo took the flashlight from her trembling hand and set it between them on the bed, its glow spilling warm and steady. "You don't have to be afraid," he murmured. "Not tonight." For the first time, his voice held no power, no command, only gentleness. They sat there, the flashlight casting long shadows on the wall. Isabella watched him, the rough edges of his face, the quiet in his eyes. She wondered what kind of man could order bloodshed yet still speak with such tenderness. "Why are you like this?" she asked softly. "Why do you make it so hard to hate you?" He smiled faintly. "Because hate and love are neighbors," Angelo mio. Same door, different key. She shook her head, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips despite herself. You shouldn't say things like that. Why not? Because words like that make people believe in things they shouldn't. He looked at her, really looked. Maybe believing in the wrong thing is still better than believing in nothing. The sound of rain filled the silence between them. Her eyes softened. You're not supposed to be this, human. And you're not supposed to care. Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating the distance that still separated them. One step, one heartbeat, one impossible truth away. When the storm finally eased, dawn crept in pale and quiet. The generator hummed back to life, lights flickering on in soft, forgiving yellow. Lorenzo was asleep in the chair by the window, the blanket she'd reluctantly draped over him sliding down his shoulder. Isabella stood looking at him, the man she'd sworn to avoid, whose life she'd saved, whose shadow had begun to blur the edges of her own heart. She whispered, almost to herself, "What are you doing to me, Vitali?" And though he didn't stir, a faint smile ghosted across his lips, as if he'd heard her in a dream. When the morning staff arrived, they found Isabella still in the east wing, hair tangled, eyes red, exhaustion and something else in her face. Long night? Sophia asked gently. Isabella only nodded. But inside, something had shifted, something irreversible. They'd both survived the storm. Now they'd have to survive each other. The storm had passed, but the world hadn't yet decided whether to breathe. The next few days at the hospital felt quieter, almost peaceful, but it was the kind of peace that comes before a storm inside the heart. Isabella Moretti moved through her rounds with mechanical calm. She smiled when she had to, spoke when it was expected, but her mind wandered too easily to one patient on the top floor. She had stayed with him through the blackout. Now, she wasn't sure whether that night had been a mistake or a miracle. Each time she checked his vitals, the air felt heavier, like the walls themselves were listening. And each time their eyes met, she looked away a little too late. One afternoon, Sophia entered the break room, a folded newspaper in hand. "You might not want to see this," she said. Isabella frowned, taking it. Headline: Sicilian Mob Power Shift. Vitali Empire Collapsing After Internal Betrayal. A photo accompanied the story, Lorenzo Vitali, wounded, leaving the hospital under police escort. The article detailed years of his dealings, rivalries, and family betrayals. Then Isabella's eyes froze on a smaller paragraph near the end. The Vitali organization is still suspected in several unsolved murders, including the 2019 hit-and-run that killed a local university student, Matteo Moretti. The world stopped moving. She stared at the words until they blurred. Her throat closed, and the paper trembled in her hands. Matteo. Her brother. The one she'd lost. The one whose killer she'd just saved. When Isabella entered Lorenzo's room, her face was pale, her eyes distant. He looked up, sensing the shift before she even spoke. "Something's wrong." "Don't," she said, voice shaking. "Don't pretend you don't know." His brows furrowed. "What are you talking about?" She slammed the newspaper onto the bed. "My brother, Lorenzo. Matteo Moretti. Hit and run, 2019. Your name. Your family's car. He died because of you." He went still, eyes darkening with a pain that wasn't surprise, it was memory. "I didn't know," he whispered. "Don't lie to me," she snapped. "You knew. You always know." His hands clenched the blanket. "I didn't drive that car, Isabella. I swear it. But yes, it was one of mine." The words hit her like a knife. "So it's true. You killed him." "I didn't," he said again, voice breaking this time. "I gave the order to deliver a message. I didn't know it would end like that. I found out too late." "Too late," she repeated, tears streaming down her face. "You found out too late to save my brother, but just in time for me to save you?" He tried to reach for her, but she stepped back. "Don't touch me," she said through gritted teeth. "Don't even say my name." "Isabella." "No," she shouted. "You're the reason I stopped believing in mercy. And now I find out the man I pulled from death is the same one who stole everything from me. Her voice cracked, the rage collapsing into grief. I saved you, Lorenzo Vitali. But I'll never forgive you. She turned and walked out, leaving him alone with the truth he'd been running from. When she was gone, Lorenzo sank into silence. The room felt colder without her, not because of the air, but because of what she'd taken with her, his chance at redemption. He stared at the newspaper, his vision blurring. Matteo Moretti. The name echoed through him like an old wound reopened. He remembered that night, a message gone wrong, a terrified young driver, a call from Rico saying it's done. He hadn't wanted it done. But he hadn't stopped it either. That was his sin, not pulling the trigger, but looking away. Now, fate had sent him the sister. The woman who had risked her life to save him. The one person he didn't deserve to be saved by. He pressed a trembling hand to his face. For the first time in years, Lorenzo Vitali, the feared mafia boss, wept. That night, Isabella sat by the sea, the same cliffs where it had all begun. The wind tangled her hair as she stared at the waves, her body shaking with rage and confusion. Sophia found her there, wrapping a jacket around her shoulders. You shouldn't be out here. I can't go back, Isabella whispered. Not after knowing. Sophia sat beside her. You loved your brother. I know. But are you sure hate will bring you peace? I don't hate him, Isabella said, tears falling freely. I wish I did. It would be easier. Sophia sighed. Then what do you feel? She shook her head. I don't know anymore. When Isabella returned to the hospital the next morning to resign, she found a sealed envelope waiting on her locker. No name on the front, just her initials, I am. Inside, a single handwritten page. Isabella. There is nothing I can say that can make what happened right. I didn't kill your brother, but I failed him. I failed you before I ever knew you. I've spent my life surrounded by blood and loyalty that meant nothing. You showed me what mercy looks like, and that's why it hurts more than any wound. I won't ask for forgiveness. But I'll make it right, even if it costs me everything. LV. Her hands trembled as she read it. For a long moment, she didn't breathe. And then, against her will, against logic, a single tear of something that wasn't quite anger slipped down her cheek. Maybe it was the faintest flicker of understanding. That night, Isabella stood once again by a hospital window, watching the rain begin to fall. Far across the city, Lorenzo Vitali was already on the move, leaving the safety of his guarded suite, stepping back into the world he built, to confront the cousin who destroyed them both. Their stories were no longer separate. The truth had bound them tighter than the sea ever could. It had been 4 days since Isabella Moretti read Lorenzo's letter. 4 days since she'd resigned from the hospital. 4 days since she'd slept. She told herself she wanted to forget him, to bury his name with the rest of her grief. But forgetting felt like trying to hold her breath forever. Impossible. She now volunteered at a small coastal clinic, patching fishermen and children instead of gangsters. The work was quiet, almost healing. But every time the sea wind touched her skin, she remembered the night she pulled him from the waves, and the look in his eyes when he said, "Because you pulled me out." She hated that she missed him. And she hated even more that part of her wondered if he was still alive. It was near dusk when she saw the black car again, not speeding this time, but crawling along the dirt road toward the clinic. Her heart dropped. Lorenzo stepped out slowly, limping slightly, his suit simple but neat. The bruises on his face had faded, though the exhaustion in his eyes had not. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has no right to touch but can't help reaching for anyway. "Before you tell me to leave," he said quietly, "just let me say one thing." She didn't move. "You shouldn't be here." "I know. But I needed to see you, to tell you it's done." "What's done?" "Rico," he said, voice low. "He's gone. He paid for what he did, for Matteo. For everything." Her chest tightened. "You killed him." "I gave him to the police," Lorenzo said. "For the first time in my life, I didn't choose blood. I chose justice." Silence stretched between them, fragile as glass. "I wanted you to know," he added. You deserved to know. She turned away, eyes glistening. You think that fixes anything? No, he said softly. But maybe it stops the bleeding. Isabella should have told him to go. Instead, she found herself pouring him a cup of coffee from the clinic's old thermos. They sat outside on a bench, the sea stretching endlessly before them. For the first time, there were no lies, no power between them, just two tired souls staring at the same horizon. He broke the silence first. When I was a boy, I wanted to be a sailor, he said with a faint smile. Not a boss. Not a killer. Just someone who could leave and start over wherever the tide took him. What stopped you? She asked quietly. My father, he said. He said the ocean was for dreamers and cowards. And I was neither. She studied him for a moment. Maybe he was wrong. He smiled, not the smirk she was used to, but something gentler, almost grateful. Maybe. They sat in silence again, the air thick with the kind of peace that feels temporary but precious. When he spoke next, his voice trembled slightly. You remind me of Lucia. My wife. She believed in forgiveness too. I didn't understand it until you. Her chest tightened. Don't do that, she said softly. Don't put me in the shadow of a dead woman. He looked at her, eyes raw. You're not in her shadow, Isabella. You're the light she was hoping I'd find. Over the next week, Lorenzo kept showing up, not as the mafia boss, but as a man helping fix broken tiles, bringing fresh groceries, occasionally reading to the elderly patients when she was too tired. At first, the clinic staff whispered. Then slowly they stopped. The man they feared began to earn quiet nods and cautious smiles. One evening, as they cleaned up after closing, Isabella caught him bandaging an old fisherman's hand, clumsy but sincere. You're terrible at this, she teased. He smiled. I'm learning from the best. Don't flatter me. He shrugged. It's not flattery if it's true. For the first time in months, she laughed, not politely, not bitterly, but truly. He froze, watching her with that same look he'd given her the night of the storm, all mixed with guilt and something deeper. Don't look at me like that, she said, suddenly shy. Like what? Like you're seeing something you thought you lost. He leaned back, voice quiet. Maybe I am. One night, the power went out again, only briefly this time. The generator hummed back, the clinic glowing in warm yellow light. Isabella stood at the window, staring at the sea. Lorenzo joined her, his hand brushing hers for a moment too long. Do you still hate me? He asked quietly. She closed her eyes. I want to. But. She exhaled shakily. But every time I try, I remember the man who looked at me in the dark and told me I didn't have to be afraid. He swallowed hard. And that man, do you still see him? She turned, eyes shining. I see both. The one who destroyed me, and the one who's trying to make it right. He nodded slowly. Maybe that's all I can be. Maybe that's enough, she whispered. Then without a word, she reached for his hand. Not forgiveness, not surrender, just connection. And for the first time, he didn't feel unworthy of it. They stayed like that, side by side, hands clasped, the sound of waves whispering below the cliffs. Lorenzo broke the silence, voice soft. You know, every time I look at the sea now, I don't see death anymore. I see you pulling me out. She smiled faintly. And every time I see it, I see my brother smiling. Maybe that's his way of telling me it's okay to let go. He turned to her. Do you believe that? I'm trying to. Then maybe we both have a chance. The night air wrapped around them like forgiveness itself, gentle, cold, real. By dawn, they were still sitting together, the world slowly lighting with gold. The pain was still there, it always would be, but now it had edges softened by understanding. She wasn't sure if it was love yet. Maybe it was something rarer, two broken souls finding peace in each other's presence. As the first sunlight touched their faces, Lorenzo said quietly, "Thank you, Isabella." For what? For teaching me that even monsters can come home. She looked at him for a long time, And then, for the first time, she didn't see a monster at all. For 2 weeks, life found rhythm again. The clinic thrived quietly, the sea calmed, and for the first time, Isabella Moretti's heart did not feel like a wound. Lorenzo Vitali worked beside her, sweeping floors, fixing things that didn't need fixing, and listening when she talked about nothing and everything. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something gentler, a friendship stitched with a thread of forgiveness. Until the men came. It happened on a Monday afternoon. Isabella was treating a fisherman with a broken wrist when the clinic door burst open and 3 men entered, suits too dark, expressions too hard. One of them smiled at her, cruelly polite. "We're looking for Lorenzo Vitali." Her heart stuttered. "He's not here." The man's grin widened. "Funny. We've been told otherwise." Before she could answer, Lorenzo emerged from the storeroom, calm, composed, like he'd been expecting this. "Go," he said to Isabella softly. "What's happening?" "It's business I thought I'd buried." "Lorenzo." "Please," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Not this time." The leader smirked. "So the ghost does live. You've made quite a mess, Vitali." Lorenzo's tone turned cold. "Tell my brother I'm done running." The man tilted his head. "Oh, Rico's dead, remember? You killed the wrong traitor." The world went still. Isabella's pulse roared in her ears. "What?" she breathed. The man looked at her, smiling. "Didn't he tell you? He didn't turn in his cousin. He killed his cousin's body double to buy himself peace." She turned toward Lorenzo. His face had gone pale. "Is that true?" she whispered. He didn't answer. "Lorenzo." He swallowed hard. "I tried to end it my way. I thought if I gave up Rico's man, the police would." "You lied," she said, stepping back. "You said you wanted justice." "I did," he shouted, desperation cracking through the calm. "But justice doesn't exist in my world, Isabella. There's only survival." She shook her head, tears burning. "Then nothing's changed. You're still the same man who destroys everything he touches." The men were closing in now, guns visible beneath their coats. Lorenzo turned to her, eyes pleading. "You have to leave. Please. If they see you with me." "Don't tell me what to do," she snapped. "You think saving my brother's killer wasn't enough? You think forgiving you was easy? And now you lie, again." "I lied to protect you," he said. "No. You lied to protect yourself." The men began shouting in Italian, fast, threatening, a language of power and death. Lorenzo stepped forward, shielding her. "She has nothing to do with this." "She does now," the leader sneered. "You made her your weakness." The gunfire was sudden, deafening. Lorenzo tackled her to the ground as the glass shattered, bullets tearing through the clinic walls. She screamed, the world spinning, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. When the noise stopped, the men were gone. But Lorenzo was bleeding. "Lorenzo!" She pressed her hands to his side, panic rising as blood soaked through her fingers. He grimaced, gripping her wrist. "It's nothing." "Don't move," she ordered. "You'll make it worse." He laughed weakly. "Still bossy." "Shut up," she whispered, tears falling. He watched her face, the tears, the fury, the fear, and his expression softened. "I'm sorry, Isabella." "Don't," she said. "Don't you dare say goodbye. I should have told you the truth." "Yes," she whispered, choking. "You should have. I didn't want to lose the only good thing I ever had." "You already did," she said through clenched teeth, holding pressure on the wound. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. At the hospital, chaos took over, flashing lights, paramedics, questions she couldn't answer. They took him into surgery. Isabella stood frozen in the waiting room, covered in his blood, her own heart torn between fury and fear. Sophia arrived minutes later, breathless. "Isabella, what happened?" "They came for him. He's hurt." "Do the police know?" "They think it was a gang hit." Sophia touched her arm gently. You can still walk away, you know. No one would blame you. Isabella stared at the floor, voice hollow. He lied to me, Sophia. I let him in. I believed he could change. And maybe he still can, Sophia said quietly. But maybe not with you watching him bleed. Hours passed. The doctor finally emerged, face unreadable. He's alive, he said. Barely. But he'll need days of rest. He lost a lot of blood. Relief hit her like a wave she couldn't stand under. She sank into a chair, covering her face with shaking hands. When she finally saw him again, he was pale, bandaged, hooked to machines. He opened his eyes weakly. You stayed. I had to make sure you were still breathing, she said flatly. That's something, he whispered. She stared at him for a long time. I can't do this, Lorenzo. Not anymore. I want to believe there's good in you, but every time I do, it gets me hurt. His eyes glistened. Then stopped believing. Her voice broke. I can't. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, love buried under pain, forgiveness fighting for air. Then she stood. Goodbye, Lorenzo. He didn't try to stop her. As she left, his eyes filled with tears, not for himself, but for the life he knew he'd lost the moment she walked out that door. Outside, the rain had returned. Isabella walked through it, her white coat clinging to her skin, the sound of sirens fading behind her. In her mind, his voice echoed, You don't have to be afraid. But now she was. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of losing him. She was afraid of never being able to stop loving him. The days after she walked away were a blur of motion without meaning. Isabella Moretti returned to the clinic but moved through it like a ghost, speaking softly, working harder, sleeping less. She told herself she was free now. Free from the chaos, from the guilt, from him. But freedom, she discovered, could ache worse than chains. Every time the sea wind slipped through the window, she smelled the night she'd pulled him from the water. Every time thunder rolled, she remembered his voice whispering in the dark, You don't have to be afraid. And she was furious that she still wasn't. Across town, in a guarded rehabilitation suite, Lorenzo Vitali stared out at the same ocean. His body healed, but his soul didn't. He had power again if he wanted it, men waiting for orders, phones buzzing with old loyalties. Yet the thought of stepping back into that world made him sick. He replayed Isabella's last words like penance. I can't do this, Lorenzo. He whispered her name into the empty room, as if saying it could summon light. He tried to write her again. The letters never left his desk. One evening, Isabella stood outside the hospital's gates, holding the letter he'd once written her. She'd come to see him, then stopped. Through the glass doors she saw him walking slowly with a cane, speaking to a nurse. He looked thinner, older, human. She could have gone in. One step. One word. Instead, she turned away. The rain began to fall, soft and cold. Sophia found her the next morning, folding linens at the clinic. You went to see him, Sophia said quietly. Isabella didn't answer. You still love him. That's not love, Isabella said. It's confusion. Maybe, Sophia replied. But confusion doesn't make you stand outside a hospital in the rain. Isabella's hands trembled. He lied to me. People lie when they're afraid, Sophia said gently. The question is, does the truth change what you saw in him? Isabella's throat tightened. I saw a man who wanted to be better. Then maybe that's who he is. That night, Lorenzo dismissed his guards. He went down to the docks alone, the same place where the sea had almost taken him. The air smelled of salt and diesel. He could still hear the echo of his old life in the waves. Guns, deals, shouts, silence. He stood at the edge, staring at the water that had once nearly swallowed him. This is where it ends, he murmured. Then he took the gold cross from his neck and threw it into the sea. When it disappeared beneath the waves, he whispered, Let her be free. And for the first time, he truly meant it. 2 days later, a newspaper headline reached the clinic. Vitali organization disbanded. Former boss turned state witness. collapses Sicilian crime ring. Isabella read it twice. He'd done it. He'd given everything up. She sank onto the bench outside, heart racing. He had chosen truth over survival, justice over pride. He had chosen her way. And suddenly, the distance between them felt unbearable. That evening, as she closed the clinic, a young delivery boy approached with an envelope. "No name," he said, handing it over. "Said you'd know who it's from." Inside was a single line, written in his careful hand. "If I walk away from the world I built, will you meet me where it ends?" Beneath the words was an address, the cliffs by the sea. Her heart pounded. The sun was sinking when Isabella arrived. The sea shimmered in molten gold, waves crashing softly below. Lorenzo stood near the edge, hands in his pockets, wind tugging at his coat. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "Neither did I." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe we both still surprise ourselves." She stopped a few feet away. "I read about what you did. I had to make things right. Or as right as a man like me can." She looked out at the horizon. "So what now?" "I testify," he said. "After that, who knows? Maybe prison. Maybe protection. Maybe nothing." She exhaled. "And you're not afraid?" He shook his head. "Fear's a luxury for people with something to lose." Her eyes met his. "You still have something." "What's that?" "Your soul." He laughed softly. "You always did see things I couldn't." The wind picked up, cold and sharp. He looked at her, eyes full of quiet pain. "If I asked you to wait for me, would you?" She hesitated. "I don't know if I can live in that shadow again." He nodded slowly. "Then don't. Live in the light instead. Just, don't forget me." She stepped closer. "You think I could?" He reached for her hand, just once, holding it like a promise neither could keep. "Isabella," he whispered, "thank you for teaching me how to choose right when everything in me wanted wrong." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for choosing." They stood like that until the sun slipped beneath the water, two broken silhouettes caught between what was lost and what was possible. That night, she wrote in her journal, "Love isn't always a happy ending. Sometimes it's the courage to let someone become who they were meant to be, even if it means you walk separate roads." She closed the book, a faint smile on her lips. Somewhere in another city, Lorenzo signed his name on a witness statement, sealing both his past and his redemption. And for the first time in years, they both slept without nightmares. A year had passed since the trial that shook Sicily. The Vitali organization was gone, its leaders imprisoned, its money seized, its power scattered like dust in the wind. And the man who had once ruled that empire sat quietly in a farmhouse overlooking the Mediterranean, a free man under a new name. Lorenzo Vitali was officially dead. Now he was simply Lorenzo Vita, a man with a limp, a weathered face, and hands that finally knew the feel of peace. Every morning he rose before sunrise, made coffee that never tasted as good as he remembered, and walked to the edge of the cliffs. He would close his eyes and listen, to the sea, the gulls, and the silence that once terrified him but now felt like grace. But some mornings, when the light touched the water just right, he still saw her face. He had written her dozens of letters in the months after the trial, letters that began with apology and ended with hope, but he never sent them. They sat bundled with twine on the old wooden table, their pages yellowed by salt air. He told himself she deserved a life untouched by his shadow. Still, every time he passed the postbox on his weekly trips to the village, his hand hovered for a heartbeat before pulling back. Freedom, it turned out, could ache just like guilt. In Palermo, Isabella Moretti had built something new. She ran a coastal rehabilitation clinic, small, sunlit, filled with laughter and stubborn hope. Her patients loved her. Her colleagues respected her. And still, when the tide was high and the wind turned cold, she'd pause by the window and think of the man she had once pulled from death. The news had said he'd been released after testifying. No one knew where he'd gone. Some said he'd left the country, others said he died quietly somewhere up north. She tried not to wonder which was true. Until the day an envelope arrived. No name, no address, only a seashell pressed into wax as a seal. Inside, a single line. If the sea ever calls you home again, follow the cliffs at dawn. Her hands trembled. She didn't need a signature to know who had written it. Dawn. The same cliffs, the same waves, but this time no storm. Only sunlight. Isabella climbed the narrow path, her heart racing. The wind tangled her hair, and the scent of salt filled her lungs. He was there, sitting on a rock near the edge, his back to her, the sea before him. For a moment she just watched him, afraid to believe he was real. Then she said softly, "You never were good at goodbyes." He turned. Time had carved lines into his face, but his eyes were the same, warm, dark, full of that quiet intensity she'd never forgotten. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "You always say that," she replied, smiling through the tears already forming. He gestured to the horizon. "I live here now. Nothing but olive trees and the ocean. Sometimes I think the sea kept a part of me that night." She stepped closer. Maybe it gave it back. They sat on the same rock, side by side, the wind tugging gently at their clothes. "I heard what you did," she said quietly. "How you testified. How you walked away from everything." He nodded. "It wasn't bravery. It was exhaustion. I was tired of waking up a ghost." She looked at him. "And now? Now I'm learning how to be alive." She smiled faintly. "That makes two of us." He laughed softly, then sobered. "I never stopped thinking of you, Isabella. Every sunrise, every wave, I saw you. I wanted to write, but what could I offer you except a past full of blood?" She reached out, touching his hand. "You offered me proof that people can change. That's worth more than forgiveness." He turned his hand, fingers brushing hers, the gesture small, reverent, certain. "And you, Angelo mio, did you forgive me?" Her eyes shimmered. "A long time ago. I just didn't know it yet." They fell silent. The wind spoke for them, carrying the scent of salt and rosemary. Below, the water glimmered gold. It looked peaceful now, not the grave it once was, but a mirror reflecting everything they'd survived. Lorenzo whispered, "Sometimes I still hear it. The crash of the waves that night. I remember thinking I was going to hell." "You didn't," she said gently. "You were saved." He looked at her. "No, Isabella. You were the one who saved me, from the water, for myself." She smiled. "Maybe we saved each other." The sun climbed higher, spilling warmth across their faces. Lorenzo stood, extending a hand. "Walk with me." She took it. They walked along the cliffs, their fingers intertwined, the world around them shimmering with the kind of quiet only peace can bring. At one point, he stopped and looked at her. "Do you think people like us deserve happiness?" She squeezed his hand. "We don't have to deserve it. We just have to accept it." He laughed softly, eyes glistening. "Then I accept." And before the moment could pass, she leaned in and kissed him, a kiss not of passion but of arrival. A kiss that said we made it. As the day stretched on, they sat again at the cliff's edge, their hands resting together in quiet certainty. She looked at the sea and whispered, "It's strange. I used to hate this view. It took my brother, my peace, everything. But now, I think he'd want me to see it like this." Lorenzo followed her gaze. "Then let's see it for him." They sat in silence, the waves whispering their endless rhythm, and somewhere deep within it, they both heard something that sounded like forgiveness. Later, as they walked back toward the farmhouse, Isabella stopped and turned. "If someone had told me 2 years ago that I'd fall in love with the man who ruined my life, I would have called them insane." Lorenzo smiled. "And now? Now I just call it life." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Life's better with you in it." She smiled softly. "Then let's not waste what's left." And together they disappeared down the sunlit path. No titles, no debts, no pasts. Just a nurse and a man who'd finally learned how to breathe.
Thank you for staying with this story to the very end. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you'll never miss the next story of healing, hope, and unexpected love.